Welcome to the fog hut.
When we first saw the house, it felt like a dream. The sunlight filtering through the canopy of the towering pines, the quiet hum of the wind rustling the leaves, and the sheer stillness of the place seemed to promise the kind of peace Claire and I had been craving. After years of enduring the chaos of the city, the noise, the traffic, the endless grind, this seemed like the perfect escape. "It's perfect," Claire had said, her voice filled with rare excitement. She stood at the edge of the porch, her hand resting lightly on the wooden railing, staring out at the endless green of the forest. I agreed. At the time, it truly felt perfect. The house itself was charming in a rustic sort of way. 2 stories tall, with weathered wood siding and a broad wraparound porch. It looked like something out of a postcard. Sure, it needed a little work, a fresh coat of paint here, a bit of sanding there, but it had character, something we both valued more than modern convenience. It was a place where we could start over, reconnect, and leave behind the stresses that had slowly been driving a wedge between us. We bought it almost immediately, ignoring the nervous looks the real estate agent gave us when we mentioned how isolated it was. "No neighbors for miles," I had said, smiling. "Exactly what we're looking for." She had nodded, forcing a smile of her own, but something in her eyes betrayed unease. I should have paid more attention to that look. The first week in the house was blissful. We spent our days unpacking, arranging furniture, and taking long walks through the forest. The air was crisp and clean, the kind that makes you feel healthier just by breathing it. At night, we would sit on the porch, wrapped in blankets, listening to the symphony of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. For the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same page, like we were building something together again. But then the lights started flickering. It began subtly, almost unnoticeable at first. A lamp would dim for a second, then return to full brightness. The overhead light in the kitchen would flicker once or twice while we were making dinner. "Old wiring," I said when Claire pointed it out. "Houses like this always have quirks. I'll check it out tomorrow." Tomorrow turned into the next day, and the day after that. The flickering continued, growing more frequent. One night, as we were watching TV, the screen cut out entirely for a moment before coming back on. At the same time, the lights in the living room flickered wildly, plunging us into an almost strobe-like chaos for several seconds. "That's not old wiring," Claire said, her voice edged with irritation and something else, worry. "I'll call an electrician in the morning," I promised. "It's probably nothing serious." The electrician came 2 days later, a middle-aged man named Tom who wore a baseball cap and spoke with the slow drawl of someone who had lived in the area his whole life. He spent hours inspecting the house, checking every outlet, every circuit, every inch of wiring. When he was done, he scratched his head and looked genuinely puzzled. "Everything looks fine to me," he said. "The wiring's old, sure, but it's solid. No loose connections, no frayed wires. Honestly, I'm not sure what's causing the problem." "What about power surges?" Claire asked. "Could it be the grid?" Tom shook his head. "Not out here. You're on your own line, and it's steady. I'll double-check the breaker," but he shrugged. "I'm not seeing anything that should cause flickering like that." He left after that, promising to let us know if he thought of anything else. But the lights didn't stop flickering. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the wooden beams settling, but it was a kind of silence that felt heavy, oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself to sleep. That's when I saw it. Even with my eyes shut, I could see a faint light, a flickering, rhythmic glow that seemed to pulse against my eyelids. I opened my eyes, expecting to see the bedside lamp flickering again, but it was off. The glow wasn't coming from the lamp. It was coming from the window. I sat up, my heart pounding. The glow was faint but unmistakable, a soft, flickering light coming from somewhere in the forest. It blinked on and off in a pattern, almost like Morse code, Claire said, startling me. She was sitting up too, her eyes fixed on the window. "What?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "The flickering," she said. "It's like Morse code. Look." I stared at the light, my mind racing. The pattern repeated, 3 short blinks, 3 long blinks, 3 short blinks. Over and over. "SOS," Claire said. "Someone's in trouble." I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew better. That light wasn't coming from someone with a flashlight. It was something else. Something I couldn't explain. "We should check it out," Claire said, already throwing off the blankets. "Wait," I said, grabbing her arm. "It's late. We don't know what's out there." She hesitated, looking torn. "If someone needs help, we'll look in the morning," I said firmly. "If it's still there, we'll go." She nodded reluctantly, but neither of us slept much that night. By morning, the light was gone. We searched the edge of the forest for any sign of it, but there was nothing, no footprints, no burned-out lantern, no evidence that anyone had been there. It was as if the light had never existed. But I knew better. I could still see it in my mind, the flickering pattern etched into my memory. And as we stood there, staring into the dense shadows of the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was watching us. Waiting. That was the moment I realized our dream house wasn't the sanctuary we'd hoped for. It was something else entirely. And whatever secrets it held, they weren't going to let us leave easily. The morning after the strange light had disappeared, Claire and I couldn't shake the unease that clung to us. The forest seemed quieter than usual, the rustling leaves and distant calls of birds muted, as if the world was holding its breath. We sat at the kitchen table, our breakfast untouched, the silence between us heavy. "Do you think it was just some kind of electrical phenomenon?" Claire asked, her voice tentative. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that everything was fine, but the truth was, I didn't have an answer. "I don't know," I said finally. "But we'll figure it out. Maybe the light was a reflection, or something from the power lines." Her eyes narrowed. "The power lines are on the other side of the house. And that light was coming from the forest." I didn't have a response. Instead, I reached for my phone and opened the browser, searching for anything that could explain what we'd seen. The results were vague: atmospheric conditions, natural gas leaks, even slump gas. None of it felt right. And the Morse code pattern? That wasn't something nature just did. By mid-afternoon, Claire suggested we take another look at the area where the light had appeared. Armed with flashlights, a compass, and my phone, we ventured into the forest. The trees stood tall and imposing, their branches weaving a dense canopy overhead. Despite the daylight, the deeper we walked, the darker it felt. "This is where we saw it, right?" Claire asked, pointing to a small clearing. I nodded, scanning the ground for any signs of disturbance. But there were no footprints, no broken branches, nothing to suggest someone had been there. Still, the air felt different. Heavy. "Over here," Claire called. She was standing near a large tree, its bark scarred with strange, jagged lines that didn't look natural. "Do you think this could be connected?" I examined the marks, running my fingers over the grooves. They were deep, too precise to be caused by weather or animals. "Maybe. Could be an old carving, or..." My voice trailed off as I noticed something lodged in one of the grooves. A small fragment of glass, glinting faintly in the light. "What is that?" Claire asked, leaning closer. I pried it loose and held it up. It was smooth, slightly curved, like a shard from a bottle or a lens. "It's glass," I said, my pulse quickening. "But what's it doing out here?" Claire frowned. "Maybe it's nothing. Could have been left here years ago." "Maybe," I agreed, though I wasn't convinced. That night, the light returned. It flickered against the trees, the same rhythmic pattern of 3 short blinks, 3 long blinks, 3 short blinks. SOS. This time, Claire didn't hesitate. "We're going out there," she said, pulling on her jacket. Claire, wait, I said, grabbing her arm. What if it's not safe? What if someone needs help? She countered, her eyes blazing with determination. We can't just ignore it. I knew she was right. Grabbing the flashlight and a sturdy walking stick, I followed her into the forest. The light led us deeper into the woods than we'd ever been. The trees grew denser, their twisted branches forming an almost impenetrable wall. But the light persisted, blinking steadily, guiding us forward. It felt deliberate, intentional, as if it wanted us to follow. Finally, we reached a small clearing. In the center stood a structure, half hidden by vines and overgrowth. It was a stone archway, crumbling with age, but intact enough to suggest it had once been part of something larger. The light hovered near the arch, flickering as if beckoning us closer. "What is this place?" Claire whispered. I stepped closer, my flashlight illuminating strange symbols carved into the stone. They were similar to the marks we'd seen on the tree earlier, jagged and precise, forming patterns that made my head ache if I looked too long. "I think it's old," I said. "Really old." The light blinked rapidly, its glow intensifying. The air grew colder, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished. The forest plunged into darkness, the silence so complete it felt suffocating. I turned to Claire, her face pale in the dim beam of my flashlight. "We should go," I said. But as we turned to leave, a sound stopped us in our tracks. It was faint at first, a low hum that seemed to emanate from the archway. The symbols on the stone began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter, pulsing in time with the hum. "Michael," Claire said, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" Before I could answer, the ground beneath us shifted, a low rumble vibrating through the earth. The glow from the archway grew brighter, spilling out into the clearing, and the hum became a roar. And then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. The light faded, the hum ceased, and the forest was silent once more. Claire and I stood frozen, our breaths visible in the cold air. Whatever had just happened, it was clear that the archway, the light, the forest itself, was trying to tell us something. But what? We turned and began the long walk back to the house, the weight of the discovery pressing heavily on us. The forest seemed darker now, the trees taller, their branches twisting unnaturally. I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd crossed a threshold, stumbled into something we didn't fully understand. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't finished with us yet. The house felt different when we returned, as if it had been holding its breath while we were gone. The silence was heavier, the creaks of the floorboards louder. Claire went straight to the kitchen, muttering about needing tea to calm her nerves, while I lingered in the living room, staring out the window at the forest. The memory of the glowing symbols on the archway lingered, a puzzle piece that didn't fit anywhere. "Do you think it's some kind of old marker?" Claire asked when she returned, a steaming mug in her hands. "Like something left behind by whoever lived here before?" I shook my head. "Markers don't glow, and they definitely don't hum like that." She sat down beside me, her face pale and drawn. "Then what? A ritual site? A portal?" Her voice trembled on the last word. I didn't answer. The idea of a portal seemed ridiculous, but then again, nothing about this place had been normal since we arrived. That night, the light didn't return. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the house setting my nerves on edge. Claire slept fitfully beside me, her breathing shallow and uneven. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were restless and fragmented, images of the archway, the glowing symbols, and the forest, dark and endless. I woke abruptly sometime after midnight. The house was dark, and for a moment, I thought everything was normal. Then I heard it, a faint sound, like scratching, coming from the walls. "Claire," I whispered, shaking her awake. "Do you hear that?" She groaned softly, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "Hear what?" The scratching grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't coming from a single point, but seemed to move, traveling through the walls, circling the room. Her eyes widened as she heard it. "What is that?" I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand and turned it on, the beam cutting through the darkness. "Stay here," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll check it out." She grabbed my arm. "Michael, don't." "I have to," I said, pulling away gently. "We need to know what we're dealing with." The scratching seemed to lead me through the house, down the stairs, and into the living room. The sound was louder now, almost frantic, as if whatever was making it was desperate to get out. I swept the flashlight over the walls, the floor, the ceiling, but saw nothing unusual. Then it stopped. The silence was deafening, pressing down on me like a weight. I turned slowly, my heart pounding, and that's when I saw it. The ornament hanging on the tree, a glass bauble Claire had picked out when we moved in, was glowing faintly, the same golden light as the symbols on the archway. I stepped closer, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The glow pulsed gently, almost like it was breathing. I reached out, hesitant, and the moment my fingers brushed the surface, a jolt of energy shot through me, freezing me in place. Images flooded my mind, the archway, the forest, the house, all connected by a thread of light that pulsed and writhed like a living thing. I saw glimpses of people, their faces blurred, their voices a chorus of whispers, and then darkness. I stumbled back, gasping for air, the flashlight clattering to the floor. The glow from the ornament faded, leaving the room in darkness once more. "Michael?" Claire's voice called from the top of the stairs, filled with worry. "I'm okay," I said, though my voice shook. "Stay up there. I'm coming back." The next morning, we decided to call someone. If the electrician couldn't explain the lights, maybe a local historian or archaeologist could shed some light on the archway and its symbols. Claire found a number for the historical society in town, and we scheduled a meeting for the following day. As we waited, we tried to go about our routine, but the house felt different. The scratching had stopped, but now there was a new sound, a low hum, almost imperceptible, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was constant, just on the edge of hearing, and it made my skin crawl. "Do you hear that?" Claire asked as we ate dinner, her fork hovering over her plate. I nodded. "It's been there all day. Like the house is buzzing." She shivered. "What if it's connected to the archway? What if it's waking up?" I didn't have an answer. Instead, I reached across the table and took her hand. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out. Together." The visit to the historical society only deepened the mystery. The archivist, a wiry man named Peter with a thick mustache, was intrigued by our description of the archway. "It sounds like a ceremonial structure," he said, flipping through an old book filled with sketches of local landmarks. "There are stories about sites like that in this area, used by indigenous tribes long before settlers arrived. Rituals, offerings, that sort of thing." "Rituals for what?" Claire asked. Peter shrugged. "Depends on the tribe. Some were meant to honor the spirits of the forest, others to ward off less friendly entities." He paused, his brow furrowing. "But if the symbols were glowing, that's something else entirely. You might be dealing with something older." "Older?" I asked, leaning forward. He nodded. "There are legends about places where the veil between worlds is thin, where energy builds and things slip through. The archway you described might be one of those places." Claire's grip on my arm tightened. "What kind of things?" Peter closed the book, his expression serious. "That depends. But whatever it is, I'd be careful. Sometimes, it's better not to disturb what you don't understand." That night, as we lay in bed, the hum grew louder. It seemed to vibrate through the walls, the floor, even the air itself. Claire clung to me, her breathing shallow, and I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. And then, just past midnight, the lights began to flicker again. The air in this new place was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It felt dense, as though it carried a weight of time and memory, pressing down on my chest. Claire's hand tightened around mine, grounding me as we both took in our surroundings. The pillars of light stretched endlessly into the darkness, their glow pulsating like a heartbeat. The symbols carved into their surfaces shimmered, alive with an energy that made my skin tingle. What is this place? Claire's voice trembled, her eyes darting to the towering structures around us. I shook my head, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know. But I think it's connected to the archway. Into the house. As we stepped further into the vast expanse, the hum that had been our constant companion grew louder, resonating deep within my chest. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a presence, a force guiding us forward. The symbols on the pillars began to shift, rearranging themselves into patterns that seemed to form words, though they were in a language I couldn't comprehend. Claire stopped abruptly, pointing to a figure emerging from the shadows ahead. It was cloaked in darkness, its form indistinct but unmistakably human. My heart raced as the figure approached, its movements deliberate and unhurried. "Who are you?" I called, my voice echoing in the vast space. "What do you want?" The figure stopped a few feet away, its face still obscured by shadow. When it spoke, its voice was deep and resonant, carrying an air of authority that made my knees weak. "You have come to restore what was broken. To awaken the balance." Claire stepped forward, her fear replaced by defiance. "Restore what? Balance to what? What does this have to do with us?" The figure tilted its head, as though considering our questions. "This place is a nexus, a point where worlds converge. Long ago, it was sealed to protect both sides. But the seal is weakened, and the balance has shifted. It paused, its shadowed gaze fixed on me. "You carry the key." I instinctively reached for the ornament in my pocket, its surface warm and pulsing faintly. "This?" I asked, holding it up. The figure nodded. The artifact was crafted to hold the balance, to contain the energies that threatened to consume this place. But it was incomplete, fractured by time and misuse. "You must restore it." "And if we don't?" Claire asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. The figure's form seemed to grow darker, its edges blurring. "Then both worlds will collapse, drawn into the void." The figure gestured toward a pedestal that appeared ahead of us, its surface etched with the same glowing symbols as the pillars. The ornament in my hand grew warmer, its light intensifying as though it was reacting to the pedestal. "Place it here," the figure commanded. "The restoration must begin." I hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "What happens if I do this?" "The balance will be restored, and the nexus will be sealed once more. But the process requires a sacrifice." Claire's eyes widened. "What kind of sacrifice?" The figure was silent for a moment, its form still and imposing. "A piece of the one who carries the key. A memory, a fragment of the soul. The artifact demands this to complete its purpose." My breath caught in my throat. The thought of losing a part of myself, even something I couldn't immediately identify, filled me with dread. But the alternative? "Michael, no," Claire said, stepping in front of me. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," I said, my voice firm despite the fear coursing through me. "This is why we were brought here. Why this has been happening. We can't let both worlds collapse." She grabbed my hand, her grip desperate. "But what if it takes something you can't live without? What if—" "Claire," I said softly, placing a hand on her cheek. "If I don't do this, none of it will matter. We'll find a way to move forward. Together." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded, stepping aside. The figure watched silently as I approached the pedestal, the ornament glowing brighter with each step. When I placed it on the surface, the light flared, blinding and brilliant, and the hum became a roar. Images flooded my mind, a cascade of memories that weren't mine. I saw the creation of the Nexus, the rituals that bound it, and the figures who had once guarded it. I felt their pain, their hope, their fear. And then, I felt something shift within me, a piece of myself pulled away, leaving a hollow ache in its place. The light dimmed, and the hum subsided. When I opened my eyes, the ornament was whole, its surface smooth and radiant. The figure stepped forward, its form more defined now, almost human. It is done, it said. The balance is restored. You have done what few could. Claire rushed to my side, her hands on my shoulders. Michael, are you okay? I nodded slowly, though I felt a strange emptiness within me. I think so. It's over. The figure raised a hand, and the pillars of light began to fade, the space around us dissolving into darkness. Return now, it said, and guard the balance, for the Nexus will always require its keepers. When the light returned, we were back in the forest, standing before the archway. The symbols were gone, and the stones looked weathered and ordinary. The air was still, the hum silenced. Claire and I stood there for a long moment, the weight of what we'd experienced settling over us. Finally, she broke the silence. Let's go home. I nodded, taking her hand as we made our way back through the forest. The house awaited us, quiet and unassuming, but I knew things would never be the same. The balance had been restored, but the cost lingered, a reminder of what we had faced, and what we had survived. The silence that had settled over the forest and the house was deceptive. It wasn't peace, it was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Claire and I tried to convince ourselves that things were normal, but the weight of the journal and the ornament's presence loomed over us like a shadow. One evening, as we were settling in for the night, a faint sound broke the stillness. It was distant, almost imperceptible at first, like the low murmur of wind through the trees. But as it grew louder, I realized it wasn't the wind at all. It was a voice. Claire stiffened beside me, her book forgotten in her lap. Did you hear that? I nodded, my pulse quickening. The voice was faint, almost melodic, rising and falling in a rhythmic cadence. It seemed to come from outside, drifting through the open windows like a song carried on the breeze. Stay here, I said, grabbing the flashlight from the coffee table. I'll check it out. She grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. Michael, no. If it's anything like before. I'll be careful, I promised, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. The voice grew clearer as I stepped onto the porch. It wasn't speaking words I recognized, but the tone was unmistakably human, a chant, repeating over and over. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing the familiar shapes of the trees, their shadows stretching long and thin in the pale moonlight. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice led me deeper into the forest, the path illuminated only by the narrow beam of my flashlight. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches forming an almost impenetrable canopy. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath my feet felt damp and soft. Finally, I reached a small clearing. In the center stood a figure cloaked in darkness, its back turned to me. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the silence that followed was deafening. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its attention shift to me, an invisible weight pressing down on my chest. Who are you? I called, my voice trembling. The figure turned slowly, and I felt my breath catch. It was human, or at least it had been. Its face was pale and gaunt, the eyes sunken and filled with an unnatural light. When it spoke, its voice was a rasping whisper, carrying an air of ancient knowledge. The balance falters, it said. You have awakened what should have remained asleep. What do you mean? I asked, stepping closer despite the fear coursing through me. The Nexus is sealed. The balance is restored. The figure's hollow eyes locked onto mine. Sealed, yes. But not forever. The Nexus is a door as much as it is a barrier. And doors can be opened. By who? It raised a skeletal hand, pointing past me toward the house. By those who seek its power. They come, drawn by the whispers of what lies beyond. I turned, following its gaze, but the forest behind me was empty. When I looked back, the figure was gone, leaving only the faint echo of its voice lingering in the cold night air. When I returned to the house, Claire was waiting for me, her face pale and her hands clenched into fists. What happened? She demanded. I heard voices. More than one. I hesitated, my mind racing. There was someone in the forest, I said finally. They warned me. About others. About people coming for the Nexus. Her eyes widened. People? What kind of people? I don't know, I admitted. But if what they said is true, we need to be ready. The Nexus might be sealed, but it's still a target. And so are we. The next few days were tense. Claire and I took turns keeping watch, scanning the forest for any sign of movement. At night, we double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, though we both knew they wouldn't do much against whatever might come for us. On the third night, as I sat by the window with the flashlight in hand, I saw it, a faint light flickering in the distance, weaving through the trees. It wasn't the same golden glow of the Nexus or the ornament. This light was cold, bluish-white, and it moved deliberately, as if searching. I woke Claire, and we watched together as the light drew closer. Soon, we could see figures moving behind it, 3, maybe 4, their forms obscured by the shadows. They carried lanterns, their light casting eerie patterns across the forest floor. What do we do? Claire whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't have an answer. The figures stopped at the edge of the forest, just beyond the clearing that surrounded the house. They stood there silently, their lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. And then, as if sensing our gaze, they turned as one and began to walk away, disappearing into the darkness. The next morning, we found footprints in the soft earth at the edge of the clearing. They were deep and deliberate, leading toward the house before turning back into the forest. Beside them, etched into the dirt, was a single symbol, one of the same patterns from the journal and the Nexus. They know, Claire said, her voice barely audible. They know what we have. I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. And they're not going to stop. We spent the rest of the day fortifying the house as best we could, though I knew it was futile. Whatever was coming for us wasn't something we could keep out with locks and barricades. The Nexus had drawn them here, and now it was up to us to protect it, and ourselves, from whatever was coming next. The calm after the night's events was fragile, a thin veneer over the simmering tension that filled the air. Claire and I avoided speaking about what had happened, the glowing ornament, the chanting figures, and the lingering symbol etched into the tree. But the silence between us spoke volumes. We both knew this was far from over. By midday, we had begun our preparations. The journal we'd found in the attic now sat open on the kitchen table, its pages detailing the experiences of the previous keeper. Their warnings echoed in my mind. The seal is strong, but vigilance is key. The Nexus draws those who seek power, and they will not stop until they possess it. Claire traced a finger over one of the passages. It's like they knew this would happen, she said softly. Whoever they were, they must have faced the same things we're dealing with. And they managed to protect it, I said, trying to muster some confidence. If they could do it, so can we. But even as I said the words, doubt crept in. The journal offered insights, yes, but no solutions. It spoke of perseverance, of sacrifice, but not of victory. It was clear the fight to protect the Nexus was a never-ending battle. That night, the air grew heavy again, the oppressive stillness returning with the setting sun. We sat in the living room, the ornament now locked inside a wooden chest we'd found in the basement. The chest itself felt like a flimsy barrier against the forces we were up against, but it was all we had. As the clock struck midnight, the hum returned, faint at first but quickly growing louder. I exchanged a glance with Claire, her fear mirrored in my own eyes. The lanterns appeared again, their cold light flickering through the trees. This time, the figures moved with purpose, their formation tighter, their steps synchronized. "They're closer," Claire whispered, clutching my arm. I nodded, my heart pounding. "Stay here. I'm going to the chest." "No," she said firmly, her grip tightening. "We're not splitting up." There was no time to argue. The chanting began again, low and guttural, filling the air with a sense of dread that was almost suffocating. The walls of the house seemed to tremble, the symbols etched into them faintly glowing once more. I grabbed the chest and brought it into the living room, placing it on the coffee table. The hum grew louder as I unlocked it, the golden light of the ornament spilling out as soon as the lid opened. Its glow pulsed in time with the chanting, as if responding to the ritual outside. "What do we do?" Claire asked, her voice barely audible over the noise. I hesitated, my mind racing. The journal had mentioned moments like this, times when the Nexus's power surged, attracting those who sought to claim it. The only way to stop them was to strengthen the seal. "We have to use it," I said, my hands trembling as I lifted the ornament. "The Nexus, it's connected to us now. We're the only ones who can protect it." Claire's eyes widened. "How? What if it's too much?" "We don't have a choice," I said, meeting her gaze. "If they break through, it's over." The moment my hands touched the ornament, the room was bathed in golden light. The hum became a roar, and the chanting outside faltered, the figures pausing in their movements. I closed my eyes, focusing on the energy coursing through me, trying to channel it toward the seal. Images flooded my mind, the archway, the glowing symbols, the endless pillars of light within the Nexus. The voice from my dreams returned, deep and resonant, guiding me. "Strengthen the barrier. Bind the energy. Protect the balance." I felt Claire's hand on my shoulder, her presence grounding me as I worked. Together, we poured our will into the ornament, the light growing brighter with each passing second. The chanting outside turned to cries of anger, the figures retreating into the shadows as the seal reasserted itself. When the light finally dimmed, the house was silent once more. The ornament in my hands was warm, its glow steady and faint. I placed it back in the chest, locking it securely before collapsing onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. "Is it over?" Claire asked, her voice shaky. I shook my head. "Not yet." But we bought ourselves time. The next morning, we found no trace of the figures. The forest was quiet, the ground undisturbed. But the symbol on the tree, the one that had glowed faintly the day before, was now etched deeper, its lines more pronounced. "It's a warning," Claire said, her voice barely a whisper. "They'll be back." I nodded, the weight of the realization settling over me. "And we'll be ready." But even as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that our time was running out. The days after our confrontation with the lantern-bearing figures were eerily quiet. The forest seemed to hold its breath, its usual symphony of rustling leaves and bird calls replaced by an oppressive silence. Claire and I took turns keeping watch at the windows, our paranoia growing with each passing hour. The knowledge that the Nexus's seal had been tested, and would be tested again, loomed over us like a dark cloud. Claire spent her time poring over the journal we had found, her brow furrowed as she tried to decipher the cryptic warnings and fragmented instructions left by the previous keeper. I busied myself fortifying the house further, though I knew the barriers were a futile defense against what we faced. One entry in the journal caught Claire's attention. She called me over, her voice urgent. "Michael, listen to this," she said, her finger tracing a passage. "When the balance falters, the Nexus calls to its guardian. A sacrifice may be required to renew the seal, to ensure the veil between worlds remains intact." I felt a chill run down my spine. "A sacrifice? What does that mean?" She shook her head, her eyes dark with worry. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it sounds like it's not optional." That night, the hum returned. It started softly, a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the walls, the floors, the very air around us. Claire and I exchanged a glance, fear and resignation mingling in our eyes. We knew what was coming. The lanterns appeared at the edge of the forest, their cold light weaving through the trees like ghostly sentinels. This time, there were more of them. Dozens, maybe even hundreds, their flickering glow creating a sea of light that surrounded the house. "They're not stopping this time," Claire said, her voice trembling. I nodded, gripping the chest that held the ornament. Its warmth seeped through the wood, pulsing faintly against my hands. "We need to act. Now." Together, we opened the chest, the golden glow spilling out and bathing the room in its light. The hum grew louder, resonating in time with the ornament's pulses. I lifted it carefully, the energy coursing through me like a living thing. "What do we do?" Claire asked, her voice barely audible over the roar of the hum. We follow the journal, I said, though my hands shook with the weight of the decision. The seal needs to be renewed. Whatever it takes. We stood in the center of the living room, the ornament glowing brightly between us. The chanting outside had reached a fever pitch, the figures moving closer, their lanterns casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. The symbols etched into the house glowed faintly, responding to the energy of the ornament. The voice from my dreams returned, deep and resonant, guiding me. The seal must be strengthened. The nexus must be protected. A sacrifice must be made. What does it want? Claire asked, panic creeping into her voice. I think it's me, I said, the realization settling over me like a weight. I'm the one connected to the nexus. It's calling for a part of me. Claire grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. No. There has to be another way. The light from the ornament flared, and the symbols on the walls pulsed in time with its glow. The figures outside grew louder, their chanting turning into a deafening roar. The pressure in the room was almost unbearable, the air thick with energy. Claire, I said, turning to her. If I don't do this, they'll break through. The nexus will fall. But what if it takes too much, she said, her voice breaking. What if you don't come back? I placed a hand on her cheek, forcing a small smile. I'll come back. I promise. With that, I turned to the ornament, its light now almost blinding. I closed my eyes, focusing on the connection I felt to the nexus, the energy flowing through me like a current. The voice spoke again, its tone calm and steady. Give what is needed. Protect the balance. I took a deep breath and let the energy flow, feeling a part of myself being drawn into the ornament. Memories, emotions, fragments of my very being, they slipped away, replaced by a strange emptiness. The light flared brighter, the hum reaching a crescendo before abruptly falling silent. When I opened my eyes, the room was still. The chanting outside had stopped, the lanterns extinguished. The figures were gone, leaving only the faint glow of the symbols on the walls as a reminder of what had happened. Claire was at my side, her hands gripping my shoulders. Michael, are you okay? I nodded slowly, though I felt a hollowness inside me that I couldn't quite describe. I think it worked. The seal is renewed. The ornament in my hands was cool now, its glow faint but steady. I placed it back in the chest, locking it securely before sinking to the floor, exhaustion washing over me. It's over, I said, though the words felt hollow. For now. Claire sat beside me, her head resting on my shoulder. We'll face whatever comes next. Together. And as the first light of dawn broke through the windows, I allowed myself a moment of hope, a fragile, fleeting hope that maybe, just maybe, we had done enough. It had unfolded. Yet, Claire and I knew this was not the end. The nexus had been protected for now, but its pull remained, a beacon for forces far beyond our understanding. The journal, with its cryptic warnings and fragmented insights, had become our constant companion. Claire continued to pore over its pages, her determination to decipher its secrets growing with each passing hour. Meanwhile, I focused on reinforcing the house, though the task felt increasingly futile. Physical barriers meant nothing against the powers that sought the nexus. One evening, as we sat by the fire, the ornament resting in its locked chest nearby, Claire broke the silence. What if there's a way to end this? She asked, her voice quiet but resolute. I looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? She pointed to a passage in the journal, one we'd both read but dismissed as too vague to act on. The nexus is both a barrier and a key. To sever its call, the guardian must step beyond the veil, anchoring the seal from within. It's risky, I said, my stomach tightening at the thought. We don't even know what that means. What if it's a trap? Claire met my gaze, her eyes steady. What if it's the only way to stop this? To stop them from coming back? I sighed, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Then we'll need to prepare. That night, we returned to the forest. The air was colder than usual, the trees casting long, skeletal shadows under the pale light of the moon. The hum that had haunted us was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that set my nerves on edge. The archway loomed ahead, its ancient stones glowing faintly as we approached. The symbols carved into its surface pulsed gently, as if waiting for something or someone. Claire and I stood before the archway, the ornament glowing faintly in my hands. The voice from my dreams returned, deep and resonant, filling the silence. The time has come. Step beyond the veil. Restore the balance. I turned to Claire, her face pale but determined. You don't have to do this with me, I said. This is my burden to bear. We started this together, she said firmly. We'll finish it together. As we stepped through the archway, the world dissolved into light. The forest, the house, everything familiar faded away, replaced by the endless expanse of the Nexus. The pillars of light stretched into infinity, their surfaces alive with shifting symbols. The hum returned, soft and steady, resonating deep within us. The voice spoke again, its tone calm and commanding. The seal must be anchored. The balance must be maintained. Are you prepared to sacrifice? I nodded, though fear coursed through me. Yes. Claire took my hand, her grip firm. We both are. The light around us intensified, the hum growing louder. The symbols on the pillars began to shift, forming patterns that felt both alien and familiar. The energy in the air was overwhelming, pressing down on us like a physical weight. The voice spoke one last time. Step forward. Become the anchor. Protect the Nexus. We moved together, the light consuming us as we stepped into the center of the Nexus. The energy surged, flowing through us, and I felt a part of myself being drawn away, replaced by a strange sense of connection. Memories, emotions, fragments of my very being, they became part of the Nexus, woven into its essence. When the light finally dimmed, we were back in the forest. The archway stood silent and still, its symbols now dark. The hum was gone, the air around us calm. Claire and I stood together, our hands clasped, the weight of what we had done settling over us. Is it over? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at the archway, the silence of the forest pressing in. For now. The seal is strong, and the balance is restored. But the Nexus, it will always need a guardian. And that's us, Claire said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the task ahead. I nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. That's us. The walk back to the house was quiet, the forest around us still. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace, however fragile. The Nexus was safe, and for now, so were we. As we stepped onto the porch, the first light of dawn broke through the trees, bathing the house in a warm, golden glow. The ornament, now locked securely in its chest, sat on the mantel, a silent reminder of the burden we had taken on. Together, Claire and I faced the new day, knowing that our fight was far from over but ready to protect the balance, no matter the cost.